Hi, Michael.
Hi, Byron.
How are you today?
I'm just fine. How about you?
Fine. We should say I'm Byron York with National Review.
I'm Michael Tomasky with The Guardian.
Okay. So I guess we're going to start off with this this political race we have going. And I think one thing that's kind of interesting, it's always dangerous to talk about something that could be outdated by the time it comes out. But we still haven't heard how much money Barack Obama raised in June. We have heard quite a few days ago that John McCain raised $22 million, but we have not heard about Obama. Now, some of that's, of course, inside baseball, but a lot is kind of riding on this. And Obama's fundraising has actually been a bit on a slide since the early primaries. In February, he raised his record, which was $55 million. And everybody was just amazed. Mm-hmm. In March, he raised $40 million. In April, he raised $31 million. And in May, it was $22 million. So there is a pattern here: 55, 40, 31, 22. So the question is, what's going on in June? And here is my one little theory. First of all, he could be playing coy and have some huge record-breaking amount to unveil, and is just waiting for people like me to say these things and then make us all look like idiots. But I do think some people on the left are getting a little bit nervous about it, and the reason they are is that it was because of this amazing fundraising ability that Obama decided to opt out of the campaign finance system at some political cost to himself, and rely on this basically small donor internet model, although he's now been going a lot. He's been doing a number of big money events. And so the question is this small donor model, does it really only work when things are really, really hot, or maybe when Obama's very fresh and he no longer is? And the other thing is, have his refinements in his policy, on things like FISA, actually disappointed the kind of people who would give him small donations? Because, I think most politicos would say, well, look, most people don't really care all that much about FISA. They don't even know what it is. But the kind of people who give these internet donations are the kind of people who do care about it. So I'm throwing all those things out to see what your reaction to this is.
I think there's probably some truth to that last thing you said. I think that I was surprised at the beginning of this month when he didn't leak his June numbers, by July 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th.
Or 7th or 8th or 9th or 10th.
Yeah, right. Which I would have thought, if he had a big number, I would have thought his campaign would have done that. They haven't done them yet. Last Friday, the Wall Street Journal reported that it was $30 million. The campaign said, no, that's way off. We're not going to tell yet, but that's not the right number. I assumed that they were hinting that they had more than that. But, I wouldn't doubt that it has really slowed down. And, in addition to what you said about, the kind of people who give internet donations being the kind of people who may care about his change on FISA, there are probably a couple other things. Number one, I think that a lot of people who give internet donations and give small donations may be a little bit tapped out for the time being. These may be the kind of people who gave $50 when they could, $70 when they could, and maybe did that 5 times or 6 times or something like that over the course of 2007 and the first half of 2008, and they may be feeling a little bit stretched right now, like, I'll do it again in September, but I can't do it right now. The second thing is that, we're just kind of a little bit, as far as many Democrats and liberals are concerned, we're in a little bit of a lull right now. The Clinton-Obama thing was action-packed day to day and engaging day to day in a way that this general election race, even though the stakes are obviously higher, hasn't quite been yet. So I think that probably accounts for a bit of the lull. I do think that, his decision to opt out is going to end up being, financially justified. I'd be really, really shocked if he didn't manage to raise more than $84 million, which is the matching money he would have gotten if he'd stayed in the system. But, we may see that some of these predictions about, $300 million they may well be overboard, because after all, that's we're only talking about 4 or 5 months until November 4th, and that's $65 million a month, and so it may well be that that's going to be hard to do.
Well, he has gotten, I've noticed, he's gotten much more aggressive lately about soliciting small donations. He's been sending out emails, his campaign has been sending out emails saying, please give $25, please watch this video and give $25. And a new one just came out in which if you give $25, you might win an all-expense-paid trip to Colorado to see his historic, and we know it's going to be historic, speech accepting the Democratic nomination at Invesco Field in Denver. And, actually, I got this today, a fundraising appeal that says, Dear Barack, I agree. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. You can count on me to support you and our movement for change all the way to the White House. So all of this stuff that people make fun of, these are the exact phrases, we're the ones we've been waiting for, that he uses in his fundraising appeals. So, how can you not be fired up? I know I am.
I'm sure they're glad to hear that. I think I also make this point. I mean, it's a question that I have as I read these stories about 150 paid organizers on the field in Missouri and 100 in Iowa and all of these sorts of things. On the one hand, that means, they're going to have less cash on hand because they're spending their money, and they're not spending it on keg parties. They're spending it on things that supposedly will reap benefits come November 4th. But it also makes me wonder if they're actually going to have the money to keep 150 paid people on the ground in Missouri through November 4th. Because if they do, well, that's a pretty prodigious operation. And you would think that 150 people with people under them and people under them and people under them can go out and find literally every potential Obama voter in the state of Missouri and drag them to the polls by the collar. But can they keep paying those people?
Right.
That's a good question.
He had an enormous burn rate in the later primaries. Over 100% at sometimes, but of course he ended up with a huge amount of cash on hand because he raised so much. But you're right, he can spend money like it's going out of style with huge television buys and big staff. And whether that will be wisely spent in the end is something that, nobody can tell in the thick of it. Now I wanted to ask you, we were going to talk about vice presidents. And on the Republican side, the talk seems to be of a kind of a comeback of Mitt Romney. And McCain made some kind of affectionate jokes about Romney the other day, which led people to think that, maybe he likes him better now. Because, they didn't like each other very much in the in the primaries. And I was talking with somebody who's an advisor to McCain the other day, and he was just going down the list, and he was bemoaning a lot of the choices. He said, there just are no good choices. Now, I'm sure there are other Republicans and maybe some advisors who would disagree with that. But there was, there were just all sorts of flaws with each of them. And the feeling was that Romney might be kind of the last man standing on that for a number of reasons, because he does have a number of good qualities, even though he got hit pretty hard and will be hit again if he's the vice presidential candidate for all of his flip-flops. So anyway, it seems like Romney is a interesting is the guy to look at right this. Now, on the Democratic side, I was surprised the other day to find John Edwards saying interested things, things that he was interested in this possibly, because I had counted him out. What is the deal with him?
I don't really know whether this is just John Edwards auditioning on George Stephanopoulos' show, or whether this is some kind of orchestrated thing. It's my own view that I don't think Edwards would be a particularly good choice myself. Actually, I think he'd maybe be a really good attorney general or something for President Obama. But I don't know that I don't know that he adds as a vice presidential candidate. He really didn't the last time, and
he couldn't win North Carolina, right?
Well, yeah, North Carolina, but he didn't help in North Carolina last time. If Obama can win North Carolina, he can win it because of him, not because of John. I sort of think.
It'll be in spite of Edwards in North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, that is entirely possible. I've come around, and I am shocked to hear myself say this because I've never been a particularly big fan of this guy. But, when you look at the list, and I agree with you that, both of them actually have a palette of, okay choices, but no great, outstanding choices. Mm-hmm. And I think, the more I think about the Democratic side and the options that are available and what Obama needs.
The suspense is building. You've been holding off on naming this name.
I know. I'm trying to build. I'm doing well, right?
Yes,
who do you think I'm going to say?
Well, I think we should go to commercial first. I'll tell you right after this.
I'm going to say Evan Bayh.
Evan Bayh, okay.
Yeah.
Just as the kind of least exciting choice possible? Is that?
Well, yeah. Partly there's a rationale for that, actually. Mm-hmm. Number one, he's from a state that apparently, according to the polls, is gettable. Indiana is close, right. and that would be a big signal and a really big smashing victory for Obama to win a state that hasn't voted Democratic since Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt in 1936. I think were the last two times. Bayh was a big Hillary Clinton supporter, so it would help rebuild that bridge. Mm-hmm. Bayh is, as far as I can see, he's liked by the Washington establishment, the Broders of the world, and so on and so forth. So I think they would sort of nod their heads and say, yes, good choice, good choice, good choice. Mm-hmm. And, he seems to have, I don't know, he's got some sort of, probably some kind of reassurance factor with middle American white voters that I think Obama probably could still use to have a little bit of, based on some of the findings from the New York Times poll today about race, which we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
But, so there you go. Evan Bayh's not really my man. I don't like the fact that he supported the Iraq War, and I think you could make an argument that Obama shouldn't have somebody who supported the war because it undercuts his message on Iraq a little bit. But maybe that's water under the bridge now. I don't know. But as I size up this list and go down and see pluses and minuses, I guess I probably think that Bayh is, not a bad choice. And how would that be seen from the Republican side?
Well, let me ask you one more thing. If opposition to the war is a threshold for this, who else could be on the list?
Well, it narrows, I guess. I mean, Webb was an obvious choice because he brought opposition to the war and yet national security and martial credentials.
Why do you think he took himself out, by the way?
Don't really know. He was going to be controversial. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any question about that.
You mean because of the Confederate stuff, or
no, with women, I think.
Oh, you mean because of the tailhook kind of stuff he wrote?
Yeah, I think mostly because of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. That may be part of the reason. And
wouldn't it be really great for getting all those
well
Hillary voters to come over to Barack?
Yeah, right. And maybe he knows himself well enough temperamentally to know that vice president really isn't quite the job for him. But, would Bayh be seen as a good choice by conservatives?
My guess is he would be seen as an extremely safe choice.
Yeah.
And a choice that indicates that Obama. I think it would. I think that they would view it strategically. They would view it as I should say tactically, as a way for Obama that it's the signal that Obama is going to be careful and be kind of try to run down the center and not do anything daring. And I think that's the way that Republicans would view it. And you're right, the establishment, would be fine with him. But it would be viewed as very unexciting. It would be a very unexciting choice by the most exciting candidate the Democrats have had in a long, long time.
Well,
so,
but
I don't know.
Maybe people want. Politicians tend to want running mates who won't steal their thunder.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it would cause him. It caused him some problems in the blogosphere, though. I think there's no question about it. And I think he really, after the last couple of weeks that he's had with the blogosphere, I think he'd have to think about that.
I mean, the blogosphere is kind of upset with him, aren't they?
Yeah, it depends on who you're talking about. Marcos Melitsas is a little bit. John Aravosis is not. I mean, it depends on who you mean. But I think the FISA thing, of all the so-called flip-flops, I think the FISA thing is the only one that really sticks in people's craw in a serious way.
Why is that one that's so distressing?
It wraps into all this stuff about, the Bush administration policies vis-a-vis executive power and the Constitution. And these are, I grant you, they're not important things to vast majorities of the people, but they're really important things to liberals, most of whom are civil libertarians. I will say one thing, though, is that, I'm sure I disagree with you about the substance of surveillance, but this fight, the whole filibuster thing was about lawsuits for phone companies, which I always thought was just such a classic Democratic interest group kind of objection to have to this. They agreed on the elements of the role of the FISA court and all this kind of substance of whose phone is tapped, with what precautions, and it was all lawsuits. Yeah. Yeah, there's probably some element there of corporate power, in opposition to a powerful corporate lobby. That's the kind of things that liberals like to see Democratic politicians stand up to, and that Obama went back on his word because he did say he'd filibuster it at one point in the past. So.
No, he did. There's no doubt he went back on his word.
Yeah, right. There's no question on that one. I question some of the other ones whether they actually are flip-flops with a capital F, but this one probably is. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago this poll. I'm looking for it right now. This New York Times poll, which kind of focused on the issue of race in the campaign. And just for the headline from that poll, it had in the horse race, it had Obama leading McCain 46-37 among. Excuse me, I shouldn't say that. That's not the horse race. That is among white voters. So. Mm-hmm. McCain leading Obama, 46-37. Among blacks, Obama leading McCain 89-2. Mm-hmm. And among Hispanics, this is pretty important here, Obama leading 62-23. So McCain will need to go back to La Raza again and do even better next time to get that closer. Anyway, so obviously that is a huge disparity. The other interesting thing that the poll showed was that I believe McCain led in all age categories over 40, and Obama leads up to 39. He has a substantial lead, and so there's this feeling, and of course the problem is that older people vote more loyally. And which I think is one of the reasons we're seeing an attack on McCain now on the issue of Social Security, because Obama needs to start peeling off some of these older people from McCain. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. There's no question. That statement that McCain made about the disgraceful way that Social Security is funded was something that I was surprised the Obama campaign didn't pounce on harder when he said it. But, just today, in fact, just this morning, the Democratic National Committee announced on a conference call this big campaign that they're going to have to try and press that issue and corner McCain on that question. There's no doubt that all these categories were pretty close, by the way. McCain wasn't massively ahead, as I recall, but in any of these categories. But I think it's pretty clear that Obama has to do better among older voters. In general, I didn't think the way Nagurney wrote the piece, Adam Nagurney from the Times, kind of suggested that race relations are stuck where they are in 1990, and there are all these trouble spots. But and
also, the point being that this fabulous event, meaning a black man on the verge of getting the one major party nomination, hasn't made anything better. I think that was kind of the point of the story. Yeah, right.
But I don't see why anybody should expect that it would make anything better. It's not going to make anything better. The fact that 70% of whites said that the country's ready to elect a black president is enough. And the Obama campaign issued this set of bullet points responding to the poll and saying, hey, actually, a lot of these things aren't really so bad. And, Michelle Obama had only a 24% approval rating among whites, but Cindy McCain's approval rating was only 20. Or maybe those numbers were inverted, but in either case, they were very close to each other. So, I would say that it's a mixed message. It's not a minefield for Obama at all. At worst, it's a mixed message. But just to get back to the point I was going to make, I don't see why anybody would think that a black man being nominated for president is going to change the nature of racial relations across this country.
But
isn't
it viewed as an indicator of change, not as kind of a magic bullet, but as an indicator of change? The fact that it happens is kind of, on the face of it, evidence that things have changed.
All it means so far is that Democrats, feel ready to elect a black president, and Democrats versus the universe of entire voters are two different things. Mm-hmm. I keep telling friends of mine and keep telling myself when I get overconfident that 35 million people voted in these primaries, and that's a lot for primaries, 35 million. But how many people voted in the general election of 2004? 122 million. Mm-hmm. Assuming that interest is higher this time, which I think it is, I think we'd agree on that.
Sure.
So we could have 135 million people voting this time. So we could have 100 million more voters on November 4th than voted in the entire primary process. That's a different universe of voters. How they feel about these things, we don't really know. 70% of them say the country's ready for a black president. That's probably all Obama needs. In terms of really deep race relations and the way white people and black people see each other and whether they work together or live next to each other and all those kinds of things, a presidential nominee is going to change that. Maybe a president, after one or two reasonably successful terms, will change those things. Mm-hmm. But that depends on Obama being elected and being reasonably successful for 8 years. But it's going to be a slow process.
I'm going to throw out a couple more nuggets from this Times poll. 62% of blacks consider Obama to be very patriotic. 32% of whites consider Obama to be very patriotic. 56% of blacks consider McCain to be very patriotic, while 77% of whites do. As you mentioned earlier, Michelle Obama is viewed favorably by just 24% of white voters. Black voters, her favorable rating is 58%, and those numbers indicate that there's substantial numbers of people out there who say they don't know enough about her to say. Right. Now, at the end of the poll was one of these questions that we've seen before, but to me, I must say the answers never cease to kind of amaze me. First of all, just a point of fact, black people account for between 12 and 13% of the U.S. population. Right. I don't know the decimal point there. Between 12 and 13%. Now, in the poll asked, just as your best guess, about what percentage of all Americans are black? Less than 10%, between 10 and 20%. Between 20 and 30%, between 30 and 50%, or more than 50%. Now, almost nobody said less than 10%, so nobody got it wrong on the low end. Let's see, 21%, 1 in 5 voters gave the correct answer, which is between 10 and 20%. 32% said that blacks comprised 20 to 30% of the population. Another 32% pegged the number between 30 and 50%, and 9% said that blacks made up more than 50% of the American population. Now, you put those numbers together, and it shows that 73% of the respondents in this poll, it was a big poll, by the way, overestimated, many of them by a huge margin, the percentage of the American population that is black. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know why that is, and I'm not sure what it means for the political race. It could mean that people overestimate Barack Obama's electoral power. I don't know, but what do you make of these numbers?
I was hoping you'd go first on that. I was talking about this with some friends just this morning. Maybe, here's the positive view of it for race relations in America. It may mean that people see black people to some degree overrepresented in a positive light on television, in sports, obviously, but in news and in sitcoms and in Cialis ads. Like black people were never in ads, right? Until like beginning even like probably in the 1980s. And now, firms that advertise that are trying to reach either a black audience or a multiracial audience put people of all races in their ads and so on and so forth. Maybe it means that people just have the impression that we're a more multicultural society than we actually are. That, I guess, would be the positive way to look at it. The negative way to look at it, of course, is that some white guy who's got some sort of quasi-racist ideas is sitting at home thinking that, there are more black people than there really are, something like that. You know what I mean? Well, so I imagine there's probably a little bit of both of those things going on there.
In answer to your second point, I don't have these numbers in front of me, but the respondents were broken down by race, too.
Yeah.
And as I remember, 73% of everybody overestimated the percentage, but I believe 67% of black respondents overestimated the percentage. Now, there were there was some number like 4% of black respondents who guessed less than 10%. So they had this idea of blacks as a very, very small minority. But there was a larger number of blacks who pegged the number above 50%. So I don't know, maybe it's somebody who lives in a rather small world. They travel in the space of a few blocks. Everybody is black in their area, and that's the way they look at it. I don't know.
You can't underestimate that. I mean, people people can't people's frame of reference is the world they operate in every day, and whether they're white or black, and people have a hard time squaring data with. If they have a hard time squaring data with the experience they see in their lives every day, they'll never remember the data point.
All right. Well, I will say that we have failed to solve that. Not only to solve it, maybe even to give any great insight into it. Because I certainly didn't have any. I have to tell you, I didn't have any.
One number, if I can just like one more point on this poll. One number that I thought actually wasn't nearly as bad for Obama as I thought it could have been, or that I would have expected it to be, was the question that was something like, you have it in front of you, I don't, but it was something like, if Obama's elected president, do you think he'll favor whites, favor blacks, or treat everybody about the same? And the percentage of white people who thought that he would favor blacks was 16.
Yeah, it was pretty small. Yeah,
it was pretty small.
And the vast majority of them were who said it would be all the same.
Yeah. That was an encouraging thing for Obama, and I think that even if white people and black people like see the abstract world very differently in terms of who gets justice and who doesn't, and those kinds of things, the answer to that question suggests that in part they've taken the measure of this actual black human being, Obama, and decided by and large that he's a fair-minded person, and I think that that helps him probably.
Now, what do you make? Just while I throw these out there, since Obama leads among blacks 89-2, and McCain leads among whites 46-37. What do you think? I did a story for National Review maybe a couple of months ago, maybe more, about black turnout in the primaries. And black turnout for Obama rose through the primaries to where it was usually 90% or over. And gosh, I shouldn't do these numbers right off the top of my head, but I believe that blacks were about 10% of the 101 or 102 million people who voted for president in 2000. They were about 11% of the 120th or 122 million who voted in 2004. And since Obama is a candidate here, that number could go up again. It could be 12 or maybe 13% of an even higher number. And this increased, and it could go, and the other thing is that I believe blacks, a much smaller number of blacks, voted 94% for Lyndon Johnson in 1964, the highest any candidate has ever scored with black voters. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Obama could do that again. So, an even higher percentage of an even bigger turnout could matter, a good bit in some key states. I suppose Ohio could be one of them. Pennsylvania might be one of them. That could be a real issue, don't you think?
Sure. I mean, I think it's got to be one of the central legs of Obama's strategy of winning this thing, doesn't it? I mean, I assume that those 150 paid people in Missouri are out there registering voters, and they're out there registering black voters. At least that's one of the things they have to be doing. I mean, I've been looking at some of these numbers, looking at exit polls from 2004 in Virginia, North Carolina, Missouri, the two states you mentioned, and some other states, looking at what percentage of the vote in 2004 in those states was black, and if Obama managed to increase that. For example, I mean, I'm talking off the top of my head. I have these numbers actually written down in a notebook at home, so I don't have it in front of me. But it's something like, in Virginia, for example, blacks comprised maybe 23% of the overall turnout in the 2004 general election. And if Obama could get that up to 28, it would mean X more thousand, 100 and something more thousand black voters. I would assume his campaign's done this math a lot more precisely than I have. But yeah, I would look for that dynamic maybe to take hold in Virginia, Ohio, Missouri, a couple other places.
And that just forces McCain, by the way, to have to try to get a higher portion of the white vote. And, what that means electorally in terms of the campaign or, whatever.
What's
Hillary
it
Clinton,
mean strategically.
Hillary Clinton in North Carolina was in a position where I think she had to get 70% of the white vote to win.
Right.
And obviously she didn't come anywhere close. It won't be nearly as bad for McCain because there are going to be Republicans in this race. But still, I don't know if we don't know where voting along racial lines will be, or how much they'll be, or what it'll look like. But it's going to be pretty fascinating. Now, Iraq and Afghanistan. This week, obviously, did you think it was weird that Obama gave his big Iraq speech, setting his policy, sort of reassuring us all that he really does want to get out in 16 months? That he did that before he went to Iraq to talk to the generals? Was that odd?
No, I didn't think that was so odd. I mean, the point of these speeches is to try and seize some political initiative, and I think he did that probably on Afghanistan with the Afghanistan portion of the speech. I think he probably did that pretty successfully, but I think that he already said the part about how when he goes to talk to the generals, he'll see what they have to say. I don't see why it was incumbent upon him to wait to give the speech.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think this surge in Afghanistan, because he talked yesterday in the speech about sending an extra 2 brigades to Afghanistan, right? Do you think this surge in Afghanistan is a good idea? And if so, why would a surge work in Afghanistan when a surge, according to Obama, wouldn't work in Iraq?
Well, I don't think he's quite said the surge hasn't worked, but anyway...
Well, he said it wouldn't work ahead of time.
Right. Well, okay, that's fair enough. Violence is on the upswing in Afghanistan, and something has to be done. We've got to try something. There were never enough soldiers there. We only ever put 12,000 soldiers in there at the beginning in 2001, and that was because they were saving up to put more soldiers into Iraq. I think that generally, in political terms, anytime we're talking about Afghanistan instead of Iraq, it probably works to Obama's or any Democrat's advantage slightly, because the Democrats have been talking about how Iraq was undermanned for how Afghanistan was undermanned for a long time. So any conversation about Afghanistan is probably playing on Democrats' turf, and McCain had to agree with Obama, and then he said, well, it may be NATO forces, not American forces. So he was guilty of refinement on that point. Substantively, I'm not a military man. I don't know enough about the difference in the situation on the ground between Iraq and Afghanistan. Does the fact that one is counterinsurgency warfare versus the fact that the other one is not, that quite that kind of traditional counterinsurgency mean that different tactics must obtain and that a surge is more likely to work in Afghanistan? It may. I don't know enough about military strategy to be able to speak to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to me that first of all, I think I personally think it is a good idea to send more troops to Afghanistan. I don't really have any doubt about that. I do suspect that there have been some Democrats who have been, over the years now, stressing Afghanistan as a way to try to get out of Iraq. I mean, so they're saying, well, what we really ought to be doing is taking the war to Afghanistan. But you get the idea, if the president wanted to really take the war to Afghanistan, I'm not sure they'd want to do that either. So we may get into an actual situation in which you take troops from Iraq, or at least, I mean, not those specific troops, but you reduce the level in Iraq by some amount, and then you raise the troop level in Afghanistan by some amount, and then you've got two more substantial wars going at the same time. So I'm not sure if this is something that's going to be really supported by the anti-war people who elected Obama in the primaries. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
If the idea is to, stabilize Afghanistan and counter the reemergence of the Taliban and relatedly to get bin Laden next door, I think there'll be more public support for that. Will MoveOn support it? I don't know, but I think early, if Obama's elected president, early in his administration, I think he's going to be given a lot of leeway. And if it involves reducing the number of brigades in Iraq, that probably helps from a political point of view with that constituency. McCain, by the way, I should note, right, is not talking about moving from Afghanistan from Iraq to Afghanistan at all, because he's not talking about reducing the troop levels in Iraq. He's talking about finding them somewhere for Afghanistan.
Well, no, actually, he is talking about reducing the troop levels in Iraq just on some unspecified timetable, although he has used the date 2013.
Right.
Which would be the 10th anniversary of the beginning of the war.
Right.
But you get the I think McCain definitely would favor some sort of gradual drawdown. I think the issue has always been timetables. So in the whole thing about 100 years, I think has really been just a canard. That's not what McCain meant, and certainly he didn't view a war as going that long. Now, on the general issue of Obama and McCain, you, Michael Tomasky, just recently wrote this, and I want to. You say some leading conventional wisdom meisters, like Times' Mark Halperin, like to say that this race is completely about Obama. When they say that, you can hear them setting themselves up as Obama's judge and jury, just waiting for him to trip up so they can say that he's failing to, quote, close the deal, and that there are just, quote, too many questions about him, as they nudge their readers toward McCain, a media darling for many years now. Now, I tell you something, I don't think McCain is the media darling any longer when compared to Obama.
Well, this is, how are we going to agree on this? This is eye of the beholder.
Right.
I mean, McCain has been a favorite of the press for a long time. I don't think there's any question about that. When people say that Obama's gotten good coverage, by and large, I can't really dispute that. Also, I think the different elements of the press corps like them both in different ways. The main point I was trying to make with that column, that paragraph was setting up sort of my central argument, which was that Obama has to find ways to make this race not all about Obama. Right. That he has to find ways to make the race about the Republican Party, about Bush, about the fact that 84% or 81% in today's Times poll say the country's on the wrong track, and tie McCain to those failures and that wrong track, and so on and so forth. So that's the main point of what I was writing in that piece.
But do you think, we have had an enormous buildup of Obama, and you seem to suggest or maybe suspect that there could be this big buildup, and then they go, aha, and then cut him off at the knees. Do you think that is on the way?
I think that there are two different dynamics going on in the mainstream press right now, and I think that they sort of work in tension with each other. There's undoubtedly a goodwill for Obama and a feeling in some quarters, stronger than in other quarters, that electing a black president would be a great thing, capital G, capital T, in historical terms, for the country. And that's a temptation that parts of the media are falling to. I don't think there's any question about it. At the same time, I would see that there are other elements of the media that, John McCain has been a media favorite. Obama isn't. Obama doesn't give the press the access McCain does. McCain sort of plays by the inside the Beltway rules, and Obama sort of doesn't. And so I think there are also tendencies and elements within the MSM, if I may, that favor McCain on those grounds.
Yeah.
So I think both of these things are going on, and I don't know, maybe they're a wash, but I do think that McCain's flip-flops, which have been serious, particularly on the Bush tax cuts and offshore drilling and a couple other things, these things have gotten attention, but I don't think, to my watching of cable television over the last couple of weeks, Byron, they haven't had equal attention to Obama's changes.
Well, I think that you have to look at those case by case. I mean, McCain benefits from the fact that his massive flip-flop on the Bush tax cuts was a long time ago.
Yeah.
That these tax cuts were passed in 2001, and he later voted for subsequent tax cuts, changed his position on the tax cuts, and it was all taken care of a long time ago.
Yeah.
The flip-flop on he's done two flip-flops that I think were justified. One was his initial flip-flop on immigration, where he switches from comprehensive reform to secure the borders first. And that flip-flop is legitimate, I think, because he's not saying, hey, I always believed in secure the borders first. He's saying, the voters told me they want to do it this way, so we're going to do it this way. They sent me this, very, very decisive message, so we're going to do it this way. And then this flip-flop on drilling is gas is pushing $5 a gallon now. We have to change things that worked in the past or things that we thought are good policy. Now we have to reconsider. So I feel that those are sort of flip-flops with a reason. Now FISA, with Obama FISA, I don't see what the reason was there. I mean, I think he was right to vote for the bill, but he had said earlier he was going to filibuster. And guns, I wouldn't call it a flip-flop, but he's been kind of all over the place on the Second Amendment. And Iraq, he hasn't flip-flopped, but I think he's caused a lot of concern amongst the people who voted for him based on the war when he started using the word gradual. I think it was, maybe I'm wrong, but it was the appearance with Hillary Clinton in Unity, New Hampshire, where he comes up and says, we want to have a responsible, gradual redeployment or withdrawal of American troops. And it's that word because he had been pushing the word immediate earlier. Not that they were all going to be removed at one time, but that he was going to immediately begin to remove troops, and then within 16 months they were all going to be gone. And the switch of the rhetorical switch of the word immediate for gradual struck me as really not really a flip-flop, but something that caused him huge concern and something that McCain could certainly exploit. So, and also the other thing is, the last thing on that is that his race went all the way up to June 3rd, so he's had to execute. If it had been a normal race and he had won it on Super Tuesday, he could have spent March, April, May flip-flopping, at a leisurely pace.
Right.
So now he's had to do a lot of flip-flops in a short period of time, which has made everybody think, including a lot of his Democratic fans, that he's had kind of a slow off the mark start to this general election race. But anyway.
Yeah, that may be. I mean, I don't think either of them's run a very good campaign, actually, so far. I mean, Tom Edsel said this in a Huffington Post piece today, and I was thinking that I wrote last week myself that Obama seemed so far to be playing not to lose, playing not to fumble.
Right.
And McCain can't take advantage of any of the mistakes that Obama's made so far. So it's been sort of like a Super Bowl, and each team has had 2 possessions, and they've punted. They've gone 3 and out and punted. It's been sort of like that so far. But we're early. On the question of bases, I guess I would just say, and it's probably about time to conclude, I guess. But if the question is which candidate is having and is going to have more trouble with his party's base, I think the answer to that question is still McCain, because he still has to prove his bona fides to very important conservative constituencies in a way that I think Obama probably just does not to liberal constituencies. And if McCain's in a box because he does need to separate himself from Bush, and he does need to move toward the center and recapture that independent maverick McCain guy to appeal to moderate voters, i.e. to win the election. But every time he does that, the more orthodox conservative constituencies who don't trust him and want to see him hold the line on certain things are going to say, hey, wait a second, you can't do that. And then, Limbaugh and all these people are going to start up again on the radio. So I think he's in a tougher box than Obama is vis-a-vis base versus center.
Well, I would have to actually agree with you. I think right now there are members of the Democratic base who are looking at Obama with some wariness. And I think right now there are members of the Republican base who just can't stand McCain. Right. Never could, never will. So, I think, look, McCain has a bigger problem with the base. And with that, I think that is the end of today's Blogging Heads episode. And so until next time, enjoyed it, and we'll talk later.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.